All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Brickner. I am the executive director of the ACLU of Delaware. I use he, him pronouns. I am so glad you are joining us tonight for our Firewall for Freedom program. Very briefly, I have a couple logistical things. The first thing is if you are a Spanish speaker, we are live interpreting this event, and down at the bottom of your Zoom, there's an option for you to select translate and select Spanish if you are a Spanish speaker. And in that vein, I'm going to quickly turn it over to my friend Charita Calvachi Mateco, who is going to give those instructions in Spanish.
Bienvenidos para todos aquellos que solo hablan en español. Por favor, sepan que pueden elegir su idioma español si chequean la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Elijan y cliquen español para que puedan escuchar todo en su propio idioma. Go back to you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Charito. And we are so glad that so many of you are on here tonight, both English and Spanish speakers. We have, I think, a really excellent program for you tonight, which will hopefully give you the ACLU's roadmap for how we in the first state can become a firewall for freedom. As I said before I get into the program, I want to give you a few logistics. So again, we are doing live translation in Spanish. But you'll also be muted right now, but we have the chat open for you. So if you have any questions or any statements or you want to comment on something, feel free to put that in the chat. All of us panelists will see that. We also have the Q&A section for you to put any questions or any comments in. We will take those and we will have time at the end for questions and answers. So we want to hear from you. Please put your information into the chat or into the Q&A. But as I said, we are here to really talk about how to take action and how we're going to get through the next few years of the Trump administration. I think I can speak for us all that we've been through the range of emotions over the last few weeks. I felt them, you felt them. We have a really great part of our website. We sent out a check-in form for people to fill out, and nearly 100 people have put their information in there and told us how they're doing after the election. I've read through all of those things, and I just want to tell you, those emotions are valid. Many people, immigrants, LGBTQ plus people who may seek reproductive health care, Black and brown people, and many others justifiably feel as though their freedom and liberty is at risk, and that's because it is. I often get accused of being an optimist by my colleagues at the ACLU of Delaware office, but in this moment, I think we must be clear-eyed in this truth. Donald Trump has shown us who he is, and we must believe him. So we remember his first administration, and he has promised to take his extreme anti-civil liberties measures even further over the next 4 years. He has pledged to declare a national emergency and send the military to carry out mass deportations. He promised to rescind protections for transgender people in schools and those seeking gender-affirming health care. He has threatened to go after his enemies, evoking dark times in our nation's history where people were investigated or prosecuted and silenced because of their political beliefs. He continues to target the reproductive rights of people across the country as states continue to ban essential access to abortion. President-elect Trump will operate from the Project 2025 playbook that his allies put out months before the election. So is it any wonder so many of us are feeling these emotions right now? And while I feel all the emotions too, that is not what tonight is about. Tonight, I feel resolved. Tonight, we begin the process of advocating for the community we deserve and for our rights and the rights of those we love. For nearly 9 months, the ACLU has been planning this potential outcome of our election. Helen and I were lucky enough to travel to a conference with many of our colleagues across the country to start planning for this potential scenario. We knew that we had to be prepared for a potential second Trump presidency, and we are ready. Delaware is in a unique place. We can be a beacon of light in this darkness. Donald Trump will become president, as he was duly elected, but we must not sit idly by while his agenda trounces our rights and liberties. Our state officials can take action right now to help mitigate the harm he will cause and truly allow the first state to be a firewall for freedom. And so I do feel optimistic because I go to work with some of the most dedicated civil libertarians in the nation. And over 100 of you are on this call right now tonight, ready to take action. The ACLU was made for this moment, and we will rise to it. Now, to level set tonight, you are going to hear from some of the ACLU of Delaware's top policy experts on those steps elected officials can take. We have been speaking with those elected officials about these policies since well before the election to get them prepared for this moment. Elected officials have their part to play, but we cannot do it without you. As the Trump administration comes into power, we must demonstrate that Delawareans support these firewall protections and urge our elected officials to adopt them. Tonight is when you learn the what of our work. But in January, we will begin with 3 activist trainings, one in each county, Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex, to prepare you with the how to advocate, how to make change, and how to be part of the ACLU's fight for freedom. These hands-on advocacy trainings will give you the tools to join us immediately as we move to action to advance our proactive civil liberties agenda, including voting rights, justice reform, LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive rights, immigrants' rights, and much more. If you can't make it to those trainings, there will be more of them, and you'll still get our latest action alerts via email where you'll learn how you can take action and be part of our work. There are many other ways to take action. If you have a community group, book club, house of worship, or other organization that you'd like us to come speak to, we would be happy to go, do an activist training, speak about these issues, and make sure that people are informed and activated. You can also sign up on our volunteer form. We have staff who will be actively going through those signups to match them with opportunities to help out in this moment. We have a monumental task ahead of us. Your support will allow us to be the strong and nimble organization we need to be in a second Trump administration. So please volunteer your time, be part of our actions, and please donate to make sure that we can continue to be the leaders of civil liberties here in the state of Delaware. So that hopefully sets the table for everyone. And now we're going to go through some of these policies and some of the major issues that we know that the Trump administration will be seizing upon come January 20th. And the one that's been, I think, on my mind and my heart the most the last several months has been the issue of immigrants' rights, because all throughout the presidential campaign, President Trump took every opportunity to beleaguer immigrants, to denigrate them, and we know that he has promised to attack those communities. So I'm very happy tonight we have 2 experts on immigrants' rights. We have Charito Cavechi-Mateco, who is our immigrants' rights organizer, and we also have Helen Salida, our campaign manager. So I'm going to turn it over to the 2 of them to talk a little bit about that work and what our response is going to be to these threats.
Thank you. I am Charito Cavechi-Mateco. Yes, there is good news. The ACLU have built out strategies to reduce the legal, logistical, and political opportunities a second Trump administration will have to violate civil rights and civil liberties. By listening to former president's own remarks in interviews and at campaign rallies, we have reason to fear that a second Trump administration will pursue an even more extremist, anti-democratic, and cruel agenda and partial or total disregard for legal constraints and governing norms. The gravity of this threat underscores the need for elected officials in Congress, state, and local governments in Delaware to come together now to begin planning a sustaining and coordinated response. We need to fight back, both to slow down and mitigate the anticipated civil liberties harms and to go on the offensive where possible while avoiding the trap or merely reacting to the moment. So let me talk to you about the access to government resources. If a second Trump administration attempts to cut off federal benefits to undocumented and other immigrants, state officials should expand and publicize state-based assistance programs that cover these individuals, including recently arrived migrants and asylum seekers, to ensure they can access critical services, including medical care and food assistance. This will ensure the protection of mixed status families and U.S. citizens and support immigrant workers and the economy. Quite often, the undocumented community are afraid to use public services, even though they pay taxes that fund those programs. Therefore, Delaware can ensure that its residents could use public benefits and who are undocumented protected by that immigrants who use these programs are not subject to a public charge rule. Needless to say, the Trump administration actions had a serious chilling effect over several years, with immigrants and their families members disenrolling or failing to enroll in health, nutrition, and economic support programs for which they were eligible, causing long-term damage to the health of both U.S. citizen children and the immigrant families. This was the worst fear of immigrants I met in a church in Wilmington. Yes. So thus, the state of Delaware also has an important role to play in public education so that their residents do not unnecessarily forgo critical services for fear of future immigration penalties. As example, Delaware and other states can do the following as collective action. The Attorney General and other local lawmakers can write to the Department of Homeland Security asking the agency to delay implementation of its public charge. 17 different states have done this before. Second, the Attorney General can sue to stop the rule from going into effect, as it was done in New York, Connecticut, Vermont, and the city of New York. Third, legislators can introduce new legislation that will offer public or private health coverage regardless of immigration status or age. Those are the magic words. In 2023, 5 states and the District of Columbia that contains the 28% of the country's foreign-born residents did this. So 4, on the food and nutrition assistance side, as in California, for example, Delaware can announce that it will offer nutrition assistance to persons 55 years or older, regardless of immigration status. Or, as in Massachusetts, Delaware can restore nutrition assistance to lawful resident immigrants, hardworking immigrants who pay taxes and contribute to keep the fabric of the economy should be protected. Now, let me tell you about access to state resources. Let me tell you about the state's firewall against civil rights violations. States hold vast droves of information, resources, and personnel that the federal government could seek to use to pursue anti-civil rights actions. But the US Constitution limits the extent to which the federal government can simply commandeer state and local governments to carry out federal policies. Through executive order and or legislative action, Delaware can effectively prohibit its employees from using state resources to assist in anti-civil rights federal actions. Through these comes with limitations. This firewall could be grounded in policy arguments around, number one, directing limited state resources. Number two, issue guidance to state and local employees on saying no to discretionary federal law enforcement requests as a matter of state constitutional obligations. This may be the case of data on driving privileged cars, for example, on undocumented residents. This data should be used only for the MB's purposes. Third, declining to collect information that could be used in ways that undermine state constitutional protections. Another key non-cooperation method is through the use of sanctuary measures. ICE often relies on lots of them from local law enforcement to help with planning and executing immigration raids. However, as part of our non-cooperation, we want the governor and attorney general to take action to prevent this sort of collaboration, as well as for guidance on how to respond to such requests from ICE or other federal law enforcement. This is critical in helping to build public trust and safety among some of our most vulnerable communities. The firewall we're working to build is critical to slow down or even prevent the federal government from committing civil rights violations through its law enforcement measures. For example, investigations, harassments, and prosecution of vulnerable groups such as undocumented immigrants, DACA recipients, those seeking or providing abortion or gender-affirming care, or protesters. But there are limits. A state government cannot direct its employees to violate a lawful federal law or order as opposed to just a request. However, Delaware can take decisive action to protect its most vulnerable citizens and stand up for the civil rights of all who live here. Now, let me tell you a little bit of sanctuary measures. The Delaware governor and other state officials should prevent any use of state and local resources in deportations and immigrant detention operations. This is what ICE will do. Relied on local law enforcement, specifically sheriff departments, to provide security and support for mass raids and at-large arrest operations. ICE will try to expand its capacity to detain immigrants by leasing local jail space. ICE will attempt to use state and local health information and access to jails to help identify people for deportation and map relationships between people who are immigrants and mixed status families or in communities with immigrants. What we ask of our governor and attorney general is to use their authority to prevent state and local officials from collaborating with ICE. We need executive orders, legislation, and attorney general guidance to address what to do if federal law enforcement requests logistical support for its operation. For example, setting up traffic perimeter during a street arrest, providing added security during a worksite raid, jail access, or certain information that could be used to track immigrants. It is important for state and local law enforcement to make clear and to reassure to local communities that they are not involved in raids and will not participate in such actions.
Thanks, Churito. And I think, Helen, you were going to add a few other things to immigrants' rights. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I just quickly want to cover one last policy recommendation in this first round. There are definitely more things we want to see in the world of immigrants' rights, but I just want to take a moment to talk about 364-day laws. So currently, under federal immigration law, a state misdemeanor that carries a potential sentence of a year or more is treated as a felony for immigration purposes, and that automatically triggers a deportation. This doesn't mean a person has to actually be sentenced to a year or more. They could receive a sentence of 20 days, but as long as that potential with that misdemeanor carries for a year or more, then it's a felony. So this means that immigrants who do have status, such as green card holders or refugees, could automatically be stripped of that status and be subjected to mandatory deportation. So what do we want to do? Well, we want the legislators over and over to amend our state's penal code so that the maximum sentence for a misdemeanor is capped at 364 days. So 1 day shy of a year, thus avoiding this automatic trigger for deportation. This ensures that criminal convictions do not result in unjust and unfair deportations. Other states have passed such laws, and it is really time for Delaware to do the same.
So, Helen, just so I understand the 364-day idea. So let's say I'm a legal permanent resident in the United States and I write a bad check and I get a conviction for that. My sentence is suspended. I don't spend any time in jail, but I write a check for my fines and maybe I get probation or something, right? But the maximum sentence for writing a bad check maybe is 1 year, right? So what would that mean for my immigration status?
Yeah, that is a really good example. So in that scenario, that would mean that you would be subject to that mandatory deportation, even though you actually had a lesser punishment in that instance, the penalty would still kick in here. Part of this also means that immigration judges aren't able to kind of weigh the circumstances, like in this case, and decide like what is actually fair and just in this case. So it really can subject a lot of people to a punishment that vastly is worse than whatever may have been committed.
Thank you for clarifying that. So again, what we heard from Charito and from Helen is the need for us to, one, take immediate action of non-cooperation, that we know that President Trump is going to, on day one or very soon after his inauguration, start the wheels of a mass deportation system. And we as the state of Delaware have the ability to say, we are not going to assist you. We are not going to provide you any police. We are not going to provide you any assistance whatsoever. And can it hopefully slow down the wheels of that mass deportation system. But we can also take other steps to help to save some people who might be especially vulnerable to deportation from that same fate, and then also get resources to people who may be struggling once the deportations happen and the federal government may cut off resources to them. So really, really important stuff. I see we have a lot of questions. As I promised, we will have time for questions at the end. Helen, I'm going to go ahead and go back to you because I know reproductive rights has also been on lots of people's minds and what a second Trump presidency will mean for that issue. So talk to us a little bit about what we might expect and how we might be able to fight back.
Yes, absolutely. So we are also expecting, along with immigration, that our reproductive rights, our reproductive freedoms are really going to be under attack. This has been clear in Trump's statements, in the Project 2025 playbook, and from other elected officials that we've seen nationwide. So to that end, we are focusing right off the bat on sort of two main categories. We're really looking at privacy and data protection and alternative sources of funding for reproductive health care. So I first want to talk a little bit about data protection and privacy. It is imperative that we strengthen our privacy laws here in Delaware, whether it is for people receiving abortion care or individuals helping folks receive gender affirming care. We want to make sure that their information is as safe and as secure as it can be, so that hostile actors, whether that is other states or the federal government, cannot easily have access to that information and use that to target them. So I want to first talk just for a moment or two about SHIELD laws. So for those of you who aren't familiar, SHIELD laws are policies that attempt to shield or protect those who provide, seek out, or help others obtain abortions or gender affirming care. And it's protecting them from civil or criminal repercussions. So a lot of these laws are relatively new and seek to protect other states from reaching in, for example, here in Delaware, into our state, going after those receiving cares. We are really, really fortunate here in Delaware to have already passed some SHIELD law protections, and I'm glad we have that for people right now. However, our SHIELD laws mostly deal with other states, so Texas or Florida, coming in and trying to do harm, but they don't cover actions by the federal government. So what we want to do is strengthen our existing SHIELD laws by saying, by also requiring, also covering actions by the federal government. While Delaware can't refuse to cooperate with legally valid federal subpoenas or warrants, we can make sure that officials here in Delaware aren't voluntarily aiding or cooperating with agents. We really want to make sure that they are having to follow the exact letter of the law and the exact process that is laid out. We want to make it, again, as hard to get this information. The other thing I want to talk about on the privacy and information protection side of things is something called reverse warrants. So there are sort of two types of these when we're talking about reverse warrants. There are e-word searches, which is basically when you go into Google or another search engine and you, well, search for something, a word or a phrase. And then we have geofencing, which is used to kind of find an unknown and unspecific number of people who happen to be around a certain place at a certain time. Both of these warrants are basically used to gain a lot of information about a lot of people without having to identify any sort of specific person or reason to believe that a crime was committed by someone in this time. It is a method used to just capture a lot of people at once. And so what does this sort of look like in practice? Well, let's say someone from Florida Googled abortion care in Delaware. And then they had a friend who helped them come here to Delaware and get care, abortion care that they needed. Florida could decide that they want to try and find this person, these people, and they could go to Google and they could ask for a warrant for everyone in a certain county, let's say Broward County, and then start going through that list and eventually find some people who had that search term who got care, and then they could go after them. So we want to stop this practice from happening. And because so many large corporations are located here in Delaware, not by banning this practice in our state, we not only can get really strong protections for people here in Delaware, we also have the ability to protect people all across our country. So it is really critical that we get both our SHIELD laws up to speed and our reverse warrants banned outright here.
Thanks, Helen. And what I like about both of those things is we like to call them cross-cutting policies, right? So the SHIELD laws protect reproductive health care right now when other states investigate, but we want to add federal protections, but we can also add gender affirming care to those protections as well, too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Just as abortion care is critical, so is making sure that we are protecting trans individuals, trans people, as they are seeking the care that they need to be their authentic self. So anytime that I am sort of referencing talking about protecting abortion, we are also really grouping in gender affirming care and other protections for other communities.
Yeah, because similarly with the reverse warrants, there are many people who are trans or maybe exploring their gender identity or their sexuality, or they're looking for gender affirming care and they're using the internet. And so having that tool of those reverse warrants in the hands of, bad state actors or the federal government could really lead to a lot of people being at risk. I am excited. I might shout out a few people in the audience here tonight, but I do see Rep. Deshauna Neal here, and they've been a big champion of trans rights here in the state, and introduced a great bill around the trans refuge. And so, again, we're glad that we have representatives in this state who care about this issue. And, we're very supportive and hopeful that those types of protections will be passed. I'm glad that you mentioned too the reverse warrants, because those again can be cross-cutting, not just for people looking for reproductive health care or gender affirming care, but also people just expressing themselves online. We have heard from Donald Trump over and over and over that he wants to exact revenge during his second term, and that he wants to go after people who disagree with him and his enemies. We've seen that movie here in this country before, and we do not want to go back down that path. I'm really glad our next person who's going to be speaking is Jared Silberglied, who is our legal fellow here at the ACLU of Delaware. He, litigates cases for us and works on all sorts of legal research, but he also does a fair amount of policy work. And he's going to be talking about the potential threats to the First Amendment that the Trump administration may embark upon, and what we can do to protect our right to dissent, to speak, and to have our political beliefs be heard. So go ahead, Jared.
Hi, everybody. So like Mike said, we very much have reason to believe that Trump and his Project 2025 agenda will try to go after his critics and crack down on protesters. But there is a lot that we can do in Delaware to make sure that we preserve those rights. There's a couple different angles on it that I want to talk about. First and foremost of course, I am the attorney on this panel, and so I'm going to talk about the courts. Obviously, we've seen over the last couple years that the courts have not always been friends to many different civil rights areas. However, we do think that from a legal standpoint, that courts will still offer robust First Amendment protections. We just in the past year plus have had multiple First Amendment cases that we've both litigated through the courts and also gotten amicable resolutions on, even outside of a formal lawsuit. And so our legal team is definitely here and ready to challenge any actions that the administration takes to try to suppress any speech. But that is only talking about things from a post hoc standpoint, and we absolutely want to talk about these things from a preemptive standpoint as well, to make sure that we don't even need to go through the court process, to make sure that people's First Amendment rights are not being suppressed in the first place. And the Attorney General of Delaware can do a lot to protect these rights. First of all, she can ensure that no state or local police force arrests anybody for engaging in their First Amendment activity, the Attorney General absolutely has power to direct law enforcement agencies across the state on various measures. As has been talked about before, the Attorney General can't necessarily control federal officers. However, state and local police forces comprise most of the arresting body in the state. And so the Attorney General can do a lot to make sure that they don't arrest anybody for engaging in First Amendment activity. Even if people are arrested, the Attorney General still has the power to drop any charges brought against people and not prosecute them. And this is something that the Attorney General has been willing to do in the past. Just 3-4 weeks ago, we settled a lawsuit against the state where they agreed that there were potential constitutional issues with the state's loitering and solicitation laws. And the Attorney General agreed that she will not prosecute these laws. And we know that we're going to have a lot more asks for her in these next couple of years, but we know that she is willing to work with us and that she can take a lot of steps to make sure that people are not prosecuted for engaging in their First Amendment activity. In addition, the General Assembly can do some work too. They can enact better versions of what are known across the country as anti-SLAPP laws. That's SLAPP with 2 P's. It stands for some complicated words, strategic litigation against public participation. Basically, what all of this means is that typically any rogue actor across the country or across the state could file a completely frivolous lawsuit against anybody that speech they disagree with and allege that the person is defaming them. And when they file such a lawsuit, their goal is not to win it. They're really, at the end of the day, just hoping that whoever the person is or the news outlet is that they disagree with will simply retract the statement instead of thinking it's worth paying lawyers to fight the case for them. But what an anti-SLAPP law allows the defendant to do in cases like this is to move to quickly and immediately dismiss the lawsuit instead of dragging it through litigation. And even more importantly, the court then gets the chance to say that this lawsuit was frivolous. And if the lawsuit was frivolous, then the rogue actor who tried to silence people by claiming defamation is going to be forced to pay a penalty to the person that they tried to silence in the first place. Delaware currently has an anti-SLAPP law on the book, but this law is very, very weak. Under the current Delaware law, a defendant can only use it if they have received a government entitlement and the lawsuit is connected to that entitlement. And if that doesn't exactly make a lot of sense, I have read the law multiple times myself and still don't entirely understand it. But the big takeaway is that this law, while it exists, is not very useful. The National Institute for Free Speech, which surveys anti-SLAPP laws across the country, has given Delaware a D-, which, you know, it's not an F, but it's not very good. But just this past summer, our neighbors over in Pennsylvania passed a law reforming their own anti-SLAPP statute. Their previous law was very similar to the law that we have now, but Pennsylvania took the step just a couple months ago to completely change their law and give way more protections than they used to have and that we have now. And so I think that if Pennsylvania can do it, then our General Assembly here in Delaware can do it too. And that is an extremely important tool to make sure that people can't abuse the court system to try to silence voices that they don't agree with.
Yeah, and again, just to put this in like very real terms, Jared. So, Donald Trump surrounds himself with a lot of people who have a lot of money and sometimes have very thin skin, right? So if I went on to X, formerly known as Twitter, and I posted Elon Musk is a big jerk, I could potentially get a lawsuit filed against me by Elon Musk saying, "Oh, he lied about me and he's spreading these falsehoods," right? And what would I have any kind of protections in Delaware against that kind of lawsuit?
I mean, your protection currently would be just that that's not what defamation is. And so you could get the lawsuit dismissed, but it would take you a lot of time and money currently to get that lawsuit dismissed. And I don't think that you quite have as much time and money as Elon Musk has to pay his lawyers. And so having an anti-SLAPP law in place would give you much more of an opportunity to, again, not only settle that issue much more quickly, but also even have Elon Musk have pay you a penalty for coming after you like that.
Oh gosh, that's great. Well, if it ever does happen, I pledge to donate that penalty money to the ACLU. But thank you for that, Jared, because again, I think, sometimes we hear about these policies and how is this going to work in real life? And when we see that the folks that have all of this political power and a lot of money and resources that they can really squash speech using the power of the courts and manipulating the courts really. And so there are ways that we can take action to fix that so that people who are speaking out and people who are dissenting aren't left defenseless. So thank you. I get to cover the last issue. So I want to talk to you all a little bit about education, which has been very much on my mind, certainly before Donald Trump was elected, but definitely in the weeks after. I think I've read
Yo voy a hablar del
about
tema
100
de
different think pieces
educación. He
about
leído como 100
Donald Trump, who may actually dismantle the Department of Education. I don't know if that's worse or than having, secretaries who may not execute the work of the Department of Education with fidelity. So I'm very worried about what's going to happen to our education system. And particularly when I listen to the words of Donald Trump, he has pledged again on day one to rescind protections for LGBTQ plus students immediately once taking office. This would include pulling back Biden era executive orders and Department of Education guidance that directs schools that discrimination against LGBTQ plus students violates federal law. In addition, President Trump may not stop just at LGBTQ plus students. There are also pregnant students, undocumented children, or children who have undocumented parents, and student protesters who could all be targeted as well. We also know that with his rhetoric that President-elect Trump and his allies use against these students, the learning environment becomes even harder for the kids due to bullying and harassment as other kids parrot the awful things they hear from leaders. I feel like I've seen that just this week with all of the horrific attacks on Representative-elect Sarah McBride. I went onto some of the social media sites and saw all of the horrible things that they were saying about her and to her. And that when our leaders are using that kind of rhetoric, especially against young people, especially those young people from vulnerable groups, it has very real consequences. But the good news is that Delaware is not powerless to stop this. We have state non-discrimination laws that say LGBTQ plus people are able to access public accommodations, which include schools. So Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings and the State Department of Education, they can issue renewed guidance to every school in the state, ensuring they know that state law protects these children no matter what, and that every child is entitled to equal education. And they can do the same thing for pregnant students, for undocumented students, for students who are expressing their First Amendment rights. So again, we can make sure that these students are protected from the Trump administration, from bullies, individuals who may pick on these students, but also from rogue school boards or administrators who may hear the words of Donald Trump and think, well, I don't have to abide by these rules that were previously in place. We need to remind people that state law does protect these students right now. And that really gets to the next thing that we can all do. We can ensure children, their parents, and allies are all informed about their rights. That's why we launched just yesterday on Transgender Day of Remembrance, a new Know Your Rights guide for trans and gender diverse youth available on our website and as wallet cards. So please spread the word about that. So, send the website to people you know and love. If you would like wallet cards, you can go onto our website, fill out the contact form, or you can email us at aclu@aclu-de.org. Let us know how many cards you might want to distribute into your community. We'll provide them to you for free, and make sure that the word gets out about the resources that are already there for our students. We plan to start producing more of these Know Your Rights cards for multiple issues that we believe are going to be at threat under the Trump administration, and we'll be doing announcements about those in the coming weeks and months as we roll those out. And we want people to utilize those again, so we're all informed about our rights. But that's not where the Trump administration is necessarily going to stop on the issue of education. Another thing that President-elect Trump has pledged to do is to strike against efforts to teach subjects like American history, literature, and art in culturally competent, complete, and truthful ways. His allies have pledged to strike against our ability to learn freely, likely through a combination of threats to schools that they may lose funding if they teach certain curricula, or weaponizing the Department of Justice to investigate them, or threats of lawsuits. However, the federal government has relatively little authority over what state and local schools decide to teach. And legislators here in the state can take action to protect our right to learn immediately. Legislation can mandate teaching of inclusive curricula. They can ban the removal, censorship, or restriction of books in classrooms and school libraries so that kids are free to learn about a whole host of issues and can learn the true stories, the complete stories of American history and world history, and all of the things that will make them critical thinkers. So again, on all of these issues, while they may seem bleak, there are ways that we can move forward. I've seen the chat and the questions popping here throughout the meeting. So I want to go ahead and move us into the question and answer section. And I think I saw something first from a person named Kat. And Kat was, I think, expressing what a lot of us may feel right now, is that Donald Trump has not followed the rules and that he may not adhere to the rule of law. So are we confident that we're going to be able to combat somebody who's not going to play by the rules? Anybody have any perspective on how do we work against somebody who isn't going to exactly play 100% by the rules?
I am happy to weigh in and then see what other thoughts people have. But I think what we saw during the last Trump administration, one thing that really worked was just consistent pressure, consistent eyes on what is happening. And as really bad things were happening, that public pressure, that calling it out, that saying that this is not okay and we won't accept that. So I think that is going to be people staying involved, people staying engaged is going to be one of the best tools that we have at our disposal to try and keep those in power held to some sort of account.
Thanks,
think
Helen. Go ahead, Jared.
I was just going to say, I think also, even if the federal government doesn't follow the rules, our state leaders in Delaware have the ability to protect people and shield people from rules not being enforced. And so I think our elected leaders here have a lot of work to do to make sure that in this state, the rules are followed.
Yeah, thank you both. I mean, I think, again, Kat, you bring up a really good point, is how do you combat somebody who isn't playing by the rules? And again, we have to work hard, we have to work smart. And, again, we don't have to abide by his rules either necessarily, right? And I think that gets to a lot of this non-cooperation and cutting off his flow of information support, because again, we have a lot of control here in this state. I saw another question starting off from Anita, and this is one that I have heard quite a bit from people who know folks who are immigrants in this country. So Anita says, I tutor a woman who is in the US on asylum from Venezuela. What can I do to support her?
Yeah, I am happy to give this an answer. The first thing I would say, on just a one-on-one level, is making sure that you are checking in the amount of, I'm sure, fear and stress that your friend is going through is going to be a lot. So just on a personal level, making sure that they're okay. But then I think another great thing that you can do to help support is really joining with us and pushing for some of the policies we outlined, whether it is ways to keep her information as secure as possible so that hopefully it is less likely that she is able or is caught up in any sort of raids or anything like that, or it is fighting to make sure that she has access to benefits so that she can go to the doctor or make sure that there's enough food on her table. Staying engaged and working to get the policies we outlined here tonight are some other really great ways to help support her during this time.
Thank you so much, Helen. So another question I see in here from Kate, she's asking, can a national ban override Delaware law? So Jared, you're the attorney here. So can you talk a little bit about, supremacy and how does a federal law interact with a state law, and what about an executive order? And so how do we, keep our little island here in Delaware while all of these federal things like executive orders and national federal laws are playing out?
So like any good lawyer, I'm going to give you the answer, it depends. I unfortunately don't think that there's such an easy answer to that question. To be frank, if Congress passes a law, that it would be very concerning and it would be difficult to fight on the local level. Now, certainly it would be fought on the national level. As for other potential areas of enforcement, again, it's hard to say without knowing exactly what's going to happen, but federal executive orders are not necessarily going to overrule our protections in Delaware. And so I don't want to make this sound super doom and gloom. I think I just honestly can say that this is an area that we don't really know that much about.
Yeah, so again, federal laws may interact and trump some state laws, although again, sometimes courts look at the interplay between those two things and come to different decisions. And then the executive orders have maybe a little bit even less sway over those state laws, but again, depends on how the executive order is written and everything. So this is why, again, the ACLU, I think, is in a strong position to fight against those things, because of course we have people on the Hill here in Legislative Hall in Dover working to pass laws in Dover, and defeat laws in DC, but also if and when those laws pass, we have attorneys who are willing to challenge those laws to make sure that we are protecting those rights in court if a bad law does pass. Another question I see here from Erica, she asked about the Know Your Rights cards, and she's wondering about like, oh, well, what if there are executive orders that come down and it alters what federal law says? How do we make sure that people are getting good and accurate information? I'm going to start with that and answer, but other folks might have some thoughts. What we're focusing on in our Know Your Rights cards are the state law protections in particular. So we're sort of thinking about if some of these federal protections that are in place go away. So as I was talking about with the transgender Know Your Rights cards, we're talking all about what is the state law protect? And if there weren't any of those federal protections, these things are still in place. But I think to your point, you do bring up a topic of what if, you know, Congress passes a bill that bans something or changes the law in some way. You know, I believe we have to make sure that we educate the community with the laws that are here right now, because we don't know if and when the law will change. And if it does change, of course, we have ways to make sure that we can get that information out to the community in an expedient way. That community resource piece, though, is the next question I want to ask. So we have another representative-elect here in the audience, Mara Gorman. And Mara is asking, do we have enough legal aid for immigrants in Delaware? What do they need to do to make sure they have the legal help they need?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this question. Short answer, we do not have enough help here in Delaware. While the people we have providing legal aid for immigrants right now are phenomenal, we need more people to be trained on how to help. We know that the immigrant community in Delaware has really grown over the last decades, and we need to make sure that the people able to help them and help given the scope of what we are anticipating is going to be happening. We need to make sure that we have folks also ramping up in training and getting ready to provide those vital legal services.
Thanks, Helen. A second question that I see here is from Mara is, do you feel like it's likely that the Trump administration may follow through with the threat to remove entire families, even if only one person is undocumented?
I believe that we should take Donald Trump at his statements and what he has said about building the largest deportation machine that this country has ever seen. My feeling and the way that I'm gearing up to respond is that they are going to try and just get any immigrant they can. Therefore, we need to be ready to protect every immigrant who calls Delaware their home. I believe that they are both creative and cruel in how they're going to do that, and we need to be creative and protective in response.
Thank you so much, Helen. More questions coming in here. So we have a couple questions that folks are asking. Obviously, a lot of us are upset about how Sarah McBride has been treated over the last several days. So folks are asking, how can we support Sarah? Anybody want to talk a little bit about how we might be able to do that in this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to chime in and then see if anyone else has any answers. I think some of the best ways that we can be supportive is making sure that we are showing just how much Delaware cares for our trans individuals and our trans community here. So we need to make sure our laws are protecting them, making sure that they are able to be their authentic self. And carry that energy to Sarah to help her during what must be an incredibly exciting, but also, I'm guessing, a time with a little bit of fear and anger over all that has been happening. So I think that making sure Delaware is accepting and welcoming is one of the best things that we can do right now.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. If you go onto the ACLU Delaware website, we published a blog that I wrote today about Sarah, and it talks about, how what Sarah is experiencing right now is what many transgender and gender diverse people experience every single day. This basic lack of humanity and loss of dignity, and that, we have to rally around being the state of neighbors and people who love one another that we are here in the state of Delaware. So I really believe the best thing that we can do, and especially in Sarah's mindset, because, Sarah's statement, she was like, I'm not here to talk about bathrooms, I want to get to work, is for us to get to work and pass some of these firewall protections for transgender and gender diverse people so that they feel fully safe in this state. Next up, I may take this a little bit, although I'll call it on other people. So one of our anonymous attendees is asking a little bit about the activist training in January. What will the session cover? Is it just going to be more depth on things covered today? So great question. As I kind of said at the beginning of this, today is really the what, right? We're talking about the policies that we can put into place. These activist trainings in January are going to be the how. They're going to be hands-on trainings on how to advocate. We will be having multiple actions come the first of the year for people to plug into. And so you're going to be learning about how to be an effective advocate, how to influence change here in the first state, and how to plug into all of the work that the ACLU is going to be having come January. We know, the first of the year is going to come around. Once it gets to January 20th and Donald Trump is inaugurated into office, we know he is going to get to work, and he's going to start on his first day with probably dozens of executive orders. And so we can't wait. We want to make sure everybody is trained up, ready to go, and to start advocating to our elected officials to make sure that they get these protections in place. So it's really going to be that hands-on training, not just going over the, wonky policy issues that we talked about tonight, but really helping you learn about advocacy and making sure that you're tied into the ACLU work going forward. And I should also say the work of our coalition partners. We have so many other folks here in the state that are working on these issues that we want to tie you into as well. I also have a question here that came in. I'm getting a lot of questions about immigration, which I understand because obviously I think that's been on the minds of so many of us. So Jean is asking here, what are the real chances of raids being conducted here in Delaware? With the number of construction companies and others relying on immigrant labor, you would think that these companies would try to protect immigrants in this state. So do you think immigrants are safer in Delaware because there are so many businesses that utilize immigrants? Helen, what do you think about that?
Yes, I think that is a good question, a good thought, but I think the chances of there being raids here in Delaware are very, very real, and we should take that very seriously. I think one thing that is frustrating among all the other things that are really frustrating in this is just the complete lack of knowledge, of understanding, of realizing the consequences of what is going to happen in the raids. Obviously, there's the devastating human consequences, families torn apart, all of that. But there are also going to be real economic consequences, whether that is not having people in agriculture, whether that is not having people in poultry plants, whether that is not having people doing construction. As much as one side likes to really vilify immigrants, our country cannot function without them. So we will see raids, and everyone is going to feel their impact very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think businesses can be allies in this work, but there have been raids in, poultry plants and farms and all sorts of other businesses across the country before. And I think there's no reason to think that it would not happen here in Delaware, where we might have businesses that do support immigrants. So we have to be prepared, I think, for the very worst. I have another question in here again from an anonymous person about immigration. Are our undocumented students safer / unable to be taken by ICE while they are in attendance at school?
Sort of, right now. So federally, there is sort of a guideline, so not a law, not a policy, that has generally been respected for quite a while, that says at sensitive locations, so places of worship, hospitals, schools, places like that, generally ICE does not go in and get people at those locations. However, there is no guarantee that that will be abided by in a Trump administration, that they will not just take away any sort of guardrails, any sort of decency that we have left in our system. So while at the moment, I would say if they're at school, they're pretty safe, I'm not sure we can count on that in the future. That is something that we have talked about in our office. We would like to see some policy also passed around sensitive locations here in Delaware, so that at least, again, agencies in Delaware, law enforcement agencies in Delaware aren't going to cooperate with any sort of raids that happen at those locations. But to make those schools, to make those places safer, we would have to get that law passed through our legislators in Dover.
Yeah, so the recommendation that we've made to legislators is a law that would prevent ICE from standing outside of courthouses, because oftentimes that prevents people who might want to be witnesses or are people who maybe have filed a lawsuit against somebody, or they are victims in a crime. That they wouldn't go to the court because they could be arrested, detained, and deported. So why not expand that to other places like schools so that people can feel fully safe? Luckily, we can also take steps to limit the information that gets out about these students. There really isn't any reason for people to know a student's immigration status, and not having that recorded in data means that then hopefully the federal government would not know that that student is undocumented at that school and would prevent any kind of arrest or raid from happening. So I want to just ask one or two more questions. So I have, I'm going to ask two more. So next to last one is, how can we as individuals offer support to immigrants? And Helen, I think this is going to be you again. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am glad to see so many people figuring out how can we support our immigrant neighbors and our communities. So like we've said tonight, and I just want to continue to reemphasize, first, if you know your neighbors, immigrants in your community, check in on them, make sure that they're okay, see what their needs are in that moment. What are they feeling? Second, again, engage with us, alongside of us, with a lot of the policies that we have laid out tonight. We are coming to you with these ideas, with this firewall, because we have really thought about it. We have looked at all of the issues. We have identified the most pressing issues that are going to have the greatest impact for our immigrant community here. So all the things that we have talked about, working to make sure that those get done and get done quickly, is going to be really key support. And also making sure that you are also trained on rights, on what is happening, so that if you see something going on in the community, you are, if it is safe, if you feel able to, stepping in to be that ally in that moment if you see something happening in the community. Our office is great, but our office cannot also be everywhere all the time. And so it's going to take all of us looking out for our neighbors to show up consistently. And I think that's some of the best ways that we can support our immigrant communities and our other vulnerable communities.
Thanks, Helen. I'll just say again, in terms of support, look for those other organizations too. There are so many that are providing direct support to immigrants. We just honored at our Candler Awards this year, La Esperanza. There's so many others throughout the state who are doing great work. One of the things that we plan to do as we're working up more information about each of these issues on our website is to make sure that those organizations are linked onto our website. So if people want to search out for other organizations that are working in this space, that they're able to donate to them to make sure that they're providing support, because also that direct support is so important. And I'll just say, I think the other thing that we can bring as the ACLU on this immigration issue is the idea that we're a national organization and we can also work regionally. So beyond talking to our national counterparts, we've already started conversations with our friends in Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, to make sure that we have a coordinated response if there are militarized officers coming through the state of Delaware, because we know that they may cross borders. We know that some people live in Maryland but work in Delaware, or work in Delaware and live in New Jersey. And so we want to make sure that we are able to provide protection for all of those folks and that we're able to coordinate, because also, like, Delaware does not have a detention facility for immigrants right now. Most of people would end up in Pennsylvania, potentially New Jersey. So we have to coordinate with our friends and neighbors at other ACLU affiliates, and we're already doing that. And that's going to, I think, really help us to have a strong response if and when anything happens, and to hopefully help to share information so that we know when things may be coming. Last question, somebody asked about, is Governor-elect Meyer ready for what may come? Is he on board with the Firewall for Freedom? So I will tell you that I have met with a few of our statewide elected officials. As I mentioned, we've been working on this, on these issues for months. Prior to the election, we met with Attorney General Jennings. We have met with Governor-elect Meyer before the election. We've been speaking to both of their offices after the election. We've also been speaking to legislators all across the state. I know I already mentioned Rep-elect Mara Gorman and Representative Deshauna Neal. We also have Representative Cindy Romer in the audience tonight. And we have been working with legislators very closely on these proposals. And so I think that our elected officials are also very clear-eyed about the threats that may be coming. And so they have been very willing partners so far. But it's also going to take a lot of courage. There is going to be a lot of media pressure swirling around a lot of these issues. There could be potential legal actions that President Trump may utilize to scare states into being subservient and to going along with his agenda. They may try and cut funds to the state of Delaware to try and keep us from protecting the rights of our residents. And so it's going to take a lot of political courage for each and every one of those elected officials to do what is necessary to protect our people. And that is why we need you. We as the ACLU are going to be advocating each and every day, but we need to have the people with us as well. And that is what I'm going to leave you all with, because that was our last question, is to come to our activist trainings in January. All three are before the inauguration. We did that on purpose because we want to get each and every one of you ready for what may come January 20th and after. We need to have our roster of people, our squad, who is going into Legislative Hall, who is calling Governor-elect Meyer on the phone, who is sending emails to Attorney General Jennings, and making sure that they know that the people of Delaware want to make sure that we are a beacon for freedom, that we remain a firewall, and that we are protecting the rights of every single one of our residents. So that is what I will leave you with, is that we at the ACLU, we are ready for this. We were born for this. We have been around for over 100 years. We have been through many presidents, many national crises. We are ready for what President Trump will throw at us and at our communities. We have your back. So stand with us. Be with us in this fight. Please, please, please register for the activist trainings. Sign up for our email list, volunteer at our office, sign up to do that, support the ACLU of Delaware, but be with us when we're in Legislative Hall in February and March and April and May and June, and when we're sending emails and when we're calling people and we're doing legislative visits and we're writing postcards. All of those things will be happening so that we can make sure we have these protections in place. And yes, we do want to provide protections to people, but where we can really be a beacon is that we have the affirmative agenda. We cannot just we can protect people's rights, but we can also move people's rights forward. We can expand voting rights. We can expand reproductive health care. We can expand trans justice here in the state. And so we have that power. Donald Trump is not an all-powerful figure. Yes, he is going to be the president of the United States again, but this is our country, and we're going to fight for it, and we're going to do everything we can to protect the people in our community. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are with you, and we so appreciate so many of you being here with us. Please, contact our office, sign up for the activist trainings, and we'll see you very, very soon. Thank you for coming.